Now, from CBS 4 News, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning, I'm Jim DeFede, and welcome to Facing South Florida. Last year, shortly after Donald Trump was elected president, he vowed to cut off funding for communities that act as sanctuary cities. In response, mayors across the country stood up to the president and said they would not be bullied. In contrast, Miami-Dade Mayor Carlos Jimenez ordered jail officials to honor all detainer requests presented by federal immigration officials. Here was the mayor last February on this show.
The only folks that we detain are people that have been arrested by Miami-Dade County for non-immigration offenses. We are not part of immigration. So if somebody is arrested and under our jurisdiction for what we consider to be a crime, they are reported to the federal government, and if the federal government decides that they want to detain them and retain them for some reason, we'll honor that request.
Prior to that, the county had a different policy. Detainer requests would only apply to individuals facing serious felonies, and even then, they would only be honored if Washington agreed to cover the cost of holding the person in the county jail. And since the federal government refused to pay the extra expense, the county effectively stopped holding people for deportation. But as I said, once President Trump was elected and took office, Mayor Jimenez ordered the change, and in February 2017, the county commission approved the new policy of holding people for immigration officials, even if those people were being held on minor charges like driving without a license. For Jimenez, the issue was money. He said holding folks for immigration was only costing the county $52,000 a year.
Because I don't want to put in risk the millions of dollars that we get from the federal government for an issue that's basically a $52,000 a year issue here in Miami-Dade County.
You keep saying it. What about you keep saying $52,000 a year, but for the families of those who are going to be detained now and possibly deported, it's more than a $52,000 issue for you.
But you have to understand that that's the policy, had been the policy of Miami-Dade County up to the year 2014, and it was because of a monetary issue that the policy was changed.
Last month, the Miami Herald reported that 436 people were held and turned over to federal immigration officials. The paper estimated the expense of the county at $175,000. But this morning, we have the first look at a new report that says the cost of taxpayers is much, much higher. The report, The Cost of Complicity, was compiled by the Community Justice Project, the Florida Immigrant Coalition, and the group that known as We Count. Joining me this morning to give us a first look at the report is Alana Greer with the Community Justice Project and Jonathan Freed from We Count and a board member of the Florida Immigrant Coalition. Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you, Jim, for having us.
Thank you, Jim. All right, so let's talk about this report. I've been going through it. You're officially going to release it next week.
That's right.
We got an advance copy. Appreciate that. So let's go through what are your major findings. Alana, I know you were the author of this report. What were the major findings here?
Sure, Jim. So we looked at the available documentation from the county. We found that the county last year spent over $13 million holding folks in local custody unconstitutionally for a good chunk of that time because of Mayor Jimenez's policy. It's not only did it not cost the county anything to maintain our previous policy, but it's costing us millions to do something immoral, unconstitutional, and something that really strikes at the heart of our immigrant community.
So your argument is that whereas Mayor Jimenez was saying previously that it was $52,000 a year and the Miami Herald estimated that it was maybe $175,000. You're placing the figure at closer to $13 million. Why the wide discrepancy?
Yes, Jim, the reason that there's such a big discrepancy is because the county numbers are only counting that 48 hours after they would otherwise be released from local custody. But the reality is when a detainer is placed on someone, their time in local custody extends dramatically, over 52 days on average. And that's because things that normally are available for residents of Miami-Dade County, things like being released on your own recognizance to come back at your trial date, paying a bail or bond, or just being released into so many of the many diversion programs that Miami-Dade County has and is proud of, are no longer available both by rule or practically to folks because of this immigration detainer.
All right, I want to. This is very important, and it's a little confusing. So I want to sort of walk through this with both of you and John. So what the county, the way the mayor came up with the $52,000 a year figure, and the way the Herald estimated that it was $175,000, is because under the policy, what they say is that the county will hold a person in jail for 48 hours on an immigration hold before and allow ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, to come and take that person. If they don't come within the 48 hours, then the detainer is withheld, is removed, and the person can go about their business. But what you're saying is the mistake the county and everyone else is making is that they add at the end of the sentence. So if I'm arrested and immediately a detainer hold is placed on me, that 48 hours doesn't start to count until after my entire period in county custody is over. Is that correct, John?
Yes, because in practice, family members aren't placing bonds, either because they can't place a bond because they have to pay the entire cost of the bond and not the 10%, or they decide not to because they feel if I pay the bond right now, my family members will be transferred to the custody of ICE. And so people are spending weeks, sometimes months in the county jail while their criminal case is adjudicated instead of bonding out almost immediately.
So let me try to walk through a hypothetical example and see if you tell me if this makes sense, what I'm saying. Let's say I'm arrested or detained for driving without a license, right? The officer picks me up, takes me to the county jail. Now, most times I can just sort of immediately be released on my own recognizance or bonded out. But because I'm entered into the system, my name is now run into federal database and a detainer hold is placed on me, right?
Correct.
Correct so far. Now, the 48 hours doesn't start at that point.
Nope.
Whereas normally I would just be released. Now, because I have a detainer hold, a judge is more likely to keep me in custody than grant me recognizance. A bondsman is unlikely to want to give me a bond or give my family members a bond to free me. Because I'm on a ICE detainer, I'm not qualified probably for a diversion program that would get me out of jail sooner. So I now have to sit in jail while my case, that original case, is heard. And that case might take a month, 2 months, or 3 months to work its way through the system. And all that time, the county is absorbing the cost. And the 48 hours only begins after that 3-month period. Let's say it takes 3 months to resolve my driving while license suspended case. It only counts after that 48 hours, whereas really you're saying we should be counting the entire 90 days.
That's right. Well, it's certainly counting against our taxpayer dollars, regardless of the estimates from the county. And I wish that was just a hypothetical that you used, but that's exactly what's happening to folks here in Miami-Dade on exactly charges like that. And the reality is that with using the estimates we did, we found that an average Miami-Dade resident arrested would spend about 33 days in jail on average. Someone with a detainer is spending 90 days in local custody.
So let me say that number again. So the average person who goes into our jail system spends about 30 days in jail.
About 33.
It's about 33. And if you've got a detainer, your average time in jail is 90 days.
Correct.
That's a lot of difference.
It's a big difference. And not only is it a big difference to taxpayers, it's a huge difference to families, right? So we're talking about holding folks in detention, which makes it less likely for them to be able to put on a meaningful defense in their case. Again, these are folks who are charged with crimes. They're not convicted of any sort of crime at this point.
Now, what's interesting is there's support for what you're saying, not just in terms of the numbers that you extrapolate, but there's a couple of things in your report that I just found really interesting that support what you're saying. Before Jimenez's policy was put into place, the county was actually underspending at the jail.
Correct. After
Jimenez's policy went into effect, in the fourth quarter, a report shows $10 million in excess was spent more than over budget at the jail. Yet at the same time, while days before the Jimenez's policy, the number of days an inmate was spending or a person was spending in county jail was decreasing. Now it's going back up.
That's right, Jim. And in fact, it's been the first quarter after this decision was the first time in 8 years that the average daily population, the average number of people we have in local custody rose. So we've been getting lower and lower and really increasing our efficacy at not holding people for minor crimes, and this policy is undoing a lot of that work.
All right, I want to take a break here because I want to talk about the impact of the racial divide on this, a number of other factors. But the bottom line is we're spending millions of dollars more and we're seeing nothing in return. This is the exact opposite of what Jimenez promised us.
Correct. And there was really no risk to begin with either. There was $0 federal dollars at risk from this. This is really just to curry favor with the Trump administration.
Let's pick this up when we come back. We'll be right back after the break.